ironic? The Decide opposition that came up here and told us that they want a government for the people, by the people, would not support a policy that directly involves people being involved in Parliament, making decisions, and actually being represented. And that's what the major issue in today's debate was: representation. And both sides of the House agreed that we wanted true representation. However, I'm going to be showing you just why, as side proposition, we've actually proven to you that we're going to be achieving true representation instead of the sort of false idea that side opposition wants us to buy into. So first off, I'm going to be looking at this idea of about how voting is not effective. Okay, and what we had is a side opposition that told us that, guys, voting is really effective, that's all the representation we need, okay? That's the only method of representation that we need. But as side proposition, we disagree. We think voting isn't actually the most effective way to have representation. Firstly, because of the fact that in the South African context, we have things like loyalty voting. We have people who vote for a party that no longer represents them or their needs. People that vote for a party that doesn't deliver the services that they need, that doesn't cater to their needs. Why? Because they believe that they owe this party something. Because they have because they believe that this party has done something for them in the past, and so they vote for a party that isn't actually truly representing them, that isn't actually catering to their needs, because of this idea of loyalty voting. Okay? And so we think that this, just on its own, shows us just how ineffective voting is, because it's not true representation. But then we also feel that in many cases people have to compromise when they vote, okay? Because while they might agree with some of a party's policies, it doesn't mean that they agree with all of a party's policies. It means that they have to sacrifice some of their views and choose a party that they don't necessarily agree with all the way, because of the fact that they think this is the next best thing. And we're not okay with people settling for the next best thing when it comes to choosing how their own country is governed. We think that we value true representation, where people who are chosen and actually represent the population of South Africa are able to go into Parliament and actually push all their views and all their opinions and not have to compromise. And so that on another level shows just how ineffective voting is. Then on another level, we see that when we look at voting, minority views are very often just completely overlooked. And this is because in many cases, parties don't see minority views as being that valuable, because they don't think that they can get enough votes out of a certain minority group in order to justify pushing that group's agendas. And so these groups are just completely overlooked because these political parties don't think they're valuable enough in terms of votes. And that's what we need to understand. If we go along with the voting system, we see that parties are catering only to certain groups of people because they think that these people can get them votes and get them into power. And on another level, my speakers have already spoken about apathy and how in many cases people are just so dissatisfied with the government that they just don't vote at all. And we think that that's just another reason why voting isn't effective, because we don't have true representation, because not everyone's opinion gets to be aired.
POI, ma'am.
And then, yes.
Please prove to us how everyone's opinion is taken up when you give them no say whatsoever.
Okay, I'm going to be dealing with that right now. But, because we think that okay, that's my next issue, but I'll flag you when I get there. But I think that just to highlight what I'm going to be talking about under that, we think that people from a certain demographic are able to know what that type of demographic goes through. They understand the type of the situations and conditions that type of demographic has to go through, because they understand things like the social and economic conditions, which are generally very similar among these groups. But I'll be explaining that in further detail later on. Okay. So, looking at why voting is so ineffective, we think that when you vote, you choose a party, right? That's all you choose. You choose a party that we've already shown you doesn't always necessarily best represent you. But we think that then a party chooses the representatives. And these representatives are accountable to the party. They obey the party's agenda. They go after the party's opinions and follow a party's line instead of the people's. Okay? And we think the reason that party-chosen representatives don't actually represent the people is because of things like barriers to entry. Because we think that generally politicians are a certain type of people. We think that, as side opposition told us, in order to become a successful politician, you have to have lots of contacts, you have to have lots of influence and things like that. We don't think that knowing a lot of people is something that necessarily makes you able to represent, makes you able to make good decisions within Parliament, etc. Okay? And then they told us that voting is effective because members of Parliament are everyday members of society. But we just don't think that's true because of the fact that we think only a certain type of person becomes a politician, and we don't think that a group of rich old men truly represent the South African population, which we don't think follows this demographic. Whereas under our model, we have a group of people who actually are everyday citizens of South Africa and who represent the true ratio of South African citizens.
Point, ma'am.
And now, this is what you actually point of information me about, so I'm just flagging here. But now I'm going to be dealing with the efficacy of our system and how our system is actually going to be more effective when it comes to representation. Because what side opposition told us is that there's no link between demographics and representation. But we think this is just blatantly not true, okay? Because let's look at the South African context, right? We think that within the South African context, because of our past, because of things like that, your gender and your race has a direct impact on your social and economic condition, okay? We think that people of certain races are, because of our history, often marginalized, often poorer, yes.
So you might end up agreeing about things like, yes, women should be free to vote, but that doesn't mean you agree on things like policy.
And we think that's good. We think that the fact that these people don't always agree, that they can have a discussion about this, that they can take into account the opinions of lots of different people and come to a solution that they all agree with, come to a solution that everyone agrees with, and that we think the population of South Africa is actually going to be happy with, that's a good thing. We don't think that everyone agreeing on every single policy is actually a good thing. Okay, and so we think that, and so that shows you just why demographics do equal representation. Because of the fact that in our country, often, many times your gender and your race has an impact on the type of life that you will lead, the type of treatment that you will get, and therefore the types of ideas that you're going to push if you have the opportunity to get into parliament.
Go on, ma'am.
And then what side opposition told us is that under our policy, the minority is still not going to get a representation. But we disagree. We think that now at least minorities get a say. They're in Parliament now, they get to input their opinion, they get to talk about these things and let people know what their particular minority group thinks. But in the status quo, as I've already proven to you, parties often overlook minorities because these minorities don't bring a large amount of votes. And so now, under our situation, at least we have these minorities' opinions being aired and being considered. And so then we have this idea of everyday people not having the skills needed to be efficient politicians. And we think that this is what Lauren actually came up and told us in today's debate. She told us that in the status quo, we have this idea of politics as being hugely complicated. But we think that when it comes to politics, the skills that you actually need are the knowledge of the problems faced by the people of your country and the ability to discuss possible solutions. And we don't think that everyday people are so stupid that they aren't going to be able to do that. We think that the fact that they are everyday people means they actually have more of a knowledge of the problems faced by the man on the ground. And so we think they actually have these skills that side opposition thinks that we need, okay? Also, we don't think politicians are necessarily always effective. South Africa proves that politicians make mistakes too. They do stupid things. They're not always infallible, okay? And so that deals with the whole idea of the skills that are needed, okay? And then next we have this idea of international perception. Firstly, I don't think the international community, they didn't tell us why we care about what the international community thinks on a domestic decision that we're making that we think will benefit our people. We think if it's benefiting our country and the international community isn't happy with that, then we don't care because we think it's best for representation, best for our government's functioning.